Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today we're going to be reviewing my 2020 Senate election prediction map, one of the last Election Corner videos of this cycle. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at my last prediction map from November the 2nd-ish, and we'll compare it to the final election results. As you can see here, I've actually left 3 states kind of undecided. However, if they are leaning in a certain direction, I have indicated the direction they are most likely going to go. So North Carolina and Alaska are probably going to go to the Republicans, while both Georgia elections are probably going to a runoff, which I believe will favor the Democrats, but that is for a future video. For now, we will leave it blank, leaving the Senate at 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats. So let's just start off with the states I got wrong. Beginning with the one in the center of the map, Iowa. Why did I get Iowa wrong? To be fair, with election predictions, it's always percentage-based, but I made a call saying Iowa was more than likely going to go blue, or more than leans going to go blue, and it went red. Pretty harshly. So how did I get that wrong? What it really comes down to is I got swept up in the fervor, and I'm not blaming anyone else here. This is on me. I should have stuck with my guns, of saying Iowa is a purple state. We had some great polls for Greenfield, I believe her name was, and Ernst wasn't doing too well. She was very unpopular in the state while Trump was doing well, and I was the only guy out there really saying Iowa was a red state now, not a purple state. I was saying the same thing about Florida, but more on that in my presidential prediction review. And I should have stuck to my guns. If I had stuck to my guns thinking Iowa was red, even with the good news for the Democrats, and you can see me make this flip about in the September-October area, when I really just go, okay, fine, I'll fall to peer pressure, and I shouldn't have done that. That's on me. If I had the information I knew now, not even know now, if I'd stuck with my guns, Iowa would have remained at tilt red. Maybe tilt blue on election day, but I would say tilt red. So that's on me, and why I got wrong. And for the record, it's not going to end up with me going, well, if I had known how the results were, I would have got it perfectly. Like with Maine and North Carolina, these aren't going to go unblue, despite the fact, So, let's just go on to the less interesting of the two, which is Maine, because it can really be summarized by one key factor here. Maine went red, Susan Collins retained her office. I said it was likely blue. And what it comes down to is, historically, suburban voters have been split ticket voting red on the top of the ballot and then blue on the down ballot. This time it flipped. Like, fully flipped, and I wasn't expecting that. I think a lot of people tuned off their brain to Susan Collins and politics in general. That's not uncommon, and you're going to see that across the board in this election. It was high turnout, high vote by mail and absentee and early ballot. This is really the first election we've had this on such a massive scale. And conventional wisdom was high turnout elections favor Democrats. As we've now learned, I and everyone else, is mail-in ballots just mean higher support. Because blue states were doing mail-in ballots and sometimes they had a lot of voter suppression, once they adopted mail-in voting, you saw a spike in blue voters. That's not true. Maine didn't have much voter suppression, but adopted more ways for people to vote. So we just saw a spike in, frankly, less attentive voters. That's not me criticizing them, or low information's another name for them. Not criticizing, just they don't pay much attention. They know, Susan Collins, she's a moderate in my current one, and I don't like Trump. That was it. That was simple. You can even see that level of thinking went through a lot of Maine, because like at the Maine 2nd District, which Biden lost, they still re-elected their current rep, who's a Democrat. And one last thing about Maine that's really something I'm going to keep deeply, deeply, deeply in mind for the future on is, frankly, when it comes to Maine, people don't know ranked choice voting very well, like how to poll for it and all that jazz. And I assumed Susan Collins was going to end up with below 49%, and that's what would sink her. But she actually ended up with over 50%. I think the Democrats' best shot from now on, because there were 2 liberal candidates, 1 conservative candidate, is to put money into a conservative candidate, like a libertarian or a constitution or both. The classic Claire McCaskill strategy. Fund some more of your opponent's other parties in order to dilute the conservative vote, and kind of so maybe more Collins people would be willing to break for Gideon in that case. That, of course, didn't happen. The state went red. But knowing what I know now about how split-ticket voting would go, and to give you an idea, there were only 2 states, really, where we didn't see... 3 states, sorry, where we didn't see split-ticket voting benefit the down ticket for the Democrats, and that was Montana, Arizona, and Alaska. But we'll get to them in a moment. But for Maine, now I would move it from likely to leans, knowing what I know now. But yeah, hindsight's 20/20 on this. So I think it's just if I had no more split ticket voting, that's really what it is. North Carolina. The last one I probably got wrong. We'll have to see. We don't have all the ballots in from North Carolina. They are still accepting them till the 11th. But they need to be postmarked by Election Day. That could put both Biden and Cal Cunningham over the line. We'll have to see. This election's going to be razor thin. If I had said tilt Democratic, I would be in the clear, but I said likely. Why did I say likely? Cal Cunningham in ahead, frankly, very ahead. But he rarely broke 50%. And the big lesson I learned from this, and many other states, this would have changed how I viewed the polls in Maine, in Iowa, in Kansas, in Georgia, heck, across the board. I would have been quicker, actually, to move Michigan to safe. And we'll get to Michigan, don't worry. I know a lot of people are probably wondering, how can you say Michigan's still safe? It was so close. We'll get to that. But North Carolina, I've learned... undecideds will swing to the incumbent, or the state median if there's no incumbent. Without a doubt, if you have a Democratic challenger in going up against Lindsey Graham and he's only getting 47% of the vote, you need to assume that remaining 6% of the vote, let's say, is going to Lindsey Graham, and that also explains South Carolina. South Carolina looked competitive. They were running almost even, 48-48. All of those undecideds broke for the incumbent. And from now on, I would usually assume if we weren't seeing much breakage or if we were seeing some sway over, I would just assume incumbents. Undecideds will go 50-50. From now on, without restriction, I am assuming undecideds will go to the state median and incumbent. I don't predict margins. I will sometimes hint at what I think they'll be. I don't predict them. I predict who I think is going to win. And with my new prediction method of, okay, I would have been more accurate if I had gone undecideds break for the incumbent. If I had done that, North Carolina, I wouldn't, being frank, I wouldn't have moved it past leans to tilt. If I was being egotistical, I would have, but I would have ended up moving South Carolina into the likely column. And both of these would have made my results much more accurate on election prediction. Need to assume undecideds will massively swing to the incumbent. While we're down in the South, let's just knock off Georgia. Georgia, I called tilt Democrat. It's looking tilt Democrat. Joe Biden may even win the presidential seat. That's actually part of the reason we can't talk about the presidency yet. I don't know if my Georgia prediction was right. And that's a pretty big prediction call to make, because if I got it right, there's some things I don't need to change. If I got it wrong, there are a few minor things I need to change, because I had tilt at the presidential level too. But it's going to runoffs, and that's going to be a whole topic for a future video. While we're down here, I also want to make a note. Alabama, Colorado, and Arizona were essentially safe in my book. They were likely because as long as there's an incumbent, things can be competitive. I am really glad I made that call. It goes really well with my all undecided swing to the median/incumbent philosophy I'm adopting, and I am very pleased with that. So we don't need to talk about Colorado, Arizona, or Alabama. I got them right for the sheer fact, well, it's good to talk about the ones you got right too. Got them right on the sheer fact of the matter. If you have a candidate who's breaking 50%, they're probably going to win in the polls. So far, we're not having anyone who is breaking 50% in the polls losing a state. So that's the margin, 50%. That's really key. Break 50% in the polls, you're doing well. Let's keep going by states. Let's knock off Michigan while we're talking about states I called safe. I know Michigan was close, but I expected it to be close. John James pulled at about 45%. Big Gary Peters, pulled at about 48 to 51%. At the end of the day, they had between a 2 and a 5-point difference within the margin of error, and it ends on a 2-point difference. 2018, John James, Republican challenger, was close but lost the election. The only reason anyone looked at Michigan's Senate race and thought, oh, that's competitive, is because it took so long for ballots to pull through. And like I said, that split ticket voting, Democrats are being favored by suburbanites. Hooray, that benefits them at the presidency. But during a general election, not during a midterm election, only general, it hurts them at the Senate, it hurts them at the House. But this also is really important because you know how I keep saying it's hurting them at the general? It'll help them in the midterms because there's no one else on the top of the ticket. They just have to vote, and I think that could really swing Georgia, too. But like I said, future video. Okay, let's do Kansas, then we'll knock off Texas, too. Kansas. I'm pleased with my call on Kansas. Democrats did make significant gains in the suburban areas of the state. They just didn't make enough and have enough turnout. We ended up in a high Republican turnout, high Democratic turnout election, which moves a lot of these states up one bosh. So I did a neutral turnout election, which marginally favored the Democrats. We had high Republican, high Democratic. So all of these states right here would have moved up one, so tilt becomes leans becomes likely. But I'm pleased with my Kansas call. I won't change that. Texas. Texas is the big guy. As you know, I called it for the presidential level for the Democrats. That didn't happen. We'll talk about Senate. Though I am now, and I am really pleased with the facts behind why I refused to flip Texas, though I think I should have made it a shade more red. So I said MJ Hagar, miles behind Biden. I was right. She's trailing at maybe 500,000 votes behind him last I checked. That is, in Texas, that's not as much as a state, let's say, like South Carolina, but that's still bad because she couldn't make up that margin on her own like, let's say, Ossoff is doing in Georgia or Peters did in Michigan. But really importantly here, Texas is more purple, but I really thought the GOP would have about a 5 million vote ceiling. We were also going off of early ballots, which all indications were favoring the Democrats. And remember what I said about mail-in ballots in Maine and such? Get a lot of people who just went, okay, yeah, well, I dislike Trump, but I'm voting Republican, or just, I vote Republican. We're in Texas, I'm supposed to. That's what everyone else does. And one last key point. So, Democrats really need Latino turnout, and the only places they really got it as it was expecting was the Southwest and Nevada, which is kind of west, not Southwest. Everywhere else, Florida and Texas specifically, that didn't turn out for them, and that's really showing a difference between what I'll call Southern Latinos and Western Latinos, just from the places they come from. A lot of Cubans and Venezuelans in Florida, a lot of multi-generation Latinos in Texas, but also Democrats just did a horrid job of turning them out. I thought they would mount at least a decent campaign. I am understanding now they barely made any effort and just assumed it would turn out the exact opposite of what Clinton did in 2016, where she focused on Latinos but didn't focus on African Americans, and you need to do both. And right now, the only reason Democrats are winning the presidency and seem to have possibly tied the Senate is due to the fact they turned out African American voters. I'm not discounting them there, but clearly the Democrats need African American turnout, followed by Latino turnout, and they need to do both excessively well. But they are forming a new coalition, which does benefit them. Sorry, got a little thing in my throat. Now we have two more states to really go over. They are Montana and Alaska. Now, Alaska at this point is uncalled. But for Montana, Montana's fun. I am pleased with Montana and my call on Montana. I looked at the polls and I kept seeing the Republican was in the lead, but Bullock was chasing up. Conventional wisdom said Montana probably wasn't going to flip. However, Steve Bullock significantly outperformed Joe Biden in Montana. Significantly, like reverse Texas outperformed. Senate outleading the presidential candidate. And that is really big here. It says to me, Democrats need to run someone who is locally known. If Bullock had run in a midterm, and this is going to be something I'm going to be saying a lot, if this was a midterm, I think Bullock would have won. But it wasn't, and he lost. And that's what Democrats need to do. They need to focus on local, for lack of a better term, heroes. I think Beto O'Rourke, he wouldn't have won, but he would have done a lot better than MJ Hagar. I think running Ossoff was a smart move, but if Stacey Abrams had been on the ticket, probably would have gone blue. Open and flat out. No, but you're seeing a trend. States where Democrats were kind of picking from, Sarah Gideon. Yeah, definitely. Kind of decent in the party, but not widely known in the state. Like right now, whichever state you're in, think about who the leader of your state Democratic Party is, or leader of them in the state house. I don't know mine, and I follow politics obsessively. So that should tell you something about what happens when you go, we'll run the state house leader. Like Mike Espy was the agriculture secretary for Barack Obama. And he didn't do, well, actually, he did very well. And that's another change I'm going to actually make. Well, before we touch Alaska, I think I really underplayed Mike Espy. I think, now, no way I could have predicted this. I'm leaving it on safe because there's no way I could have made this call. But with Mike Espy, it should have been Likely. I should have made a call for Likely. He was ultra competitive, had a chance of winning. He didn't, and I think if Democrats put a lot of money into the state, he wouldn't have won as well, but he was the former agriculture secretary and had run once before. That name recognition really helped him. So he was more competitive than a lot of other people. Thank you, Windows Defender. But also, like, yeah, no one had heard of MJ Hagar until she won the Senate primary. No one had heard of Theresa Greenfield. No one had heard of Sarah Gideon. No one had heard of Cal Cunningham, and that hurt them. A lot of people in Montana heard of Steve Bullock. A lot of people had heard of Mike Espy. A lot of people had heard of Ossoff. He had name recognition and fame. All of these, they did better in. Also, while we're adjusting states, I will have moved Texas to leans. I wanted to put as Likely, which is what I should have been, but I had the information. I thought mail-in ballots were very favorable to the Democrats, and was hearing from a lot of decent sources these ballots are favoring the Democrats. So, lastly, we have Alaska. Alaska, right now I have leans Republican. Maybe I should have moved it to Likely based on my all undecideds move. Well, I would have. With my new policy, it would have moved to Likely. All undecideds go for incumbent. But we have to watch. This call could be the wrong call, but I think what ended up happening is across this, like, at the end of the day, the guy wasn't as competitive as he should have been. And like I said, a lot of people, they were running low name recognition candidates in races where I think you needed a lot of local name recognition. So that's how I would have adjusted my map. As you can see, there's only one flip here. I still would have gone 2 states wrong. And I could blame that on the polling, but that's a bit of a cheap cop-out of, well, it's the polls' fault, not my own. You can read the polls better, and I'll be more aware of them in the future, but these two states, if Susan Collins wasn't there, Maine would have gone blue. And if North Carolina had been slightly more competitive for the Democrats, and it still could flip. If it flips, I was right, and everyone should worship me as a god. I only got one wrong. But, man, North Carolina, I should have been a lot more, overall, just assumed undecideds went full whole hog Republican. So, with all that being said, how do you think I could adjust this prediction? I've got some other points I'll make in my presidential video, but I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think I should have been more bearish on certain states or more bullish on them? Should I have bearish being in favor, bearish being against, bullish being for? I don't know why I said them in the wrong order. But, yeah, this was my map. This was the finals. I was off by between 1 and 2 states, but let's see how it all turns out in the end. So, with all that being said, if you like the video, drop a like down below and also leave a comment. I know I said that before, but I just want to cover it again. If you want to see more from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell to be alerted when new content comes out. If you want to hear more from me outside of YouTube, I do have a Twitter, at OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link in the description, and, as always, most importantly, have a wonderful day, and get some rest.